Let's say you went to a beautiful location, you took some nice photos, you come back home and you start editing those photos. Now today, I will not talk about the whole range of mistakes that you can do while editing your photos, but I will talk about 3 mistakes, and after these 3 mistakes, I will give you a bonus mistake, and in my personal opinion, that bonus mistake, it's a lot more important than any other mistake that you're doing. So if you want to hear about it, just stick around to almost the end of this video and find out. And let's talk about mistake number 1, and that is the destructive way of editing. This mistake is related to Photoshop, because when you're editing a Lightroom or Camera Raw, the edits are saved on an XMP file, and whenever you want, you can go back and do those adjustments or change the adjustments that you did. But when you are in Photoshop, there are 2 ways of editing your images: the destructive way and the non-destructive way. And even if for lots of years there are lots of tutorials of people talking about the non-destructive way of editing, there are still a lot of photographers that are beginners usually that edit their photos in a destructive way. And let me show you something like this. For example, I have this image, and the way some people edit the image, I will duplicate this layer just to have a backup, and they go something like image adjustments, and let's say, okay, I want the brightness and contrast, and I want to have an image with a little bit more brightness and some more contrast, and then they hit OK, and let's do another one, adjustments, hue and saturation, and let's increase the saturation somewhere, something like this, and hit OK. Now let's assume that you're doing, let's say, 100 steps like this, and you think about at some point that, okay, I don't want something to look like that. For example, at step 25, I did maybe some contrast, and I don't want that contrast to be that big. I wanted to have a little bit more control on that contrast. First, you can go back. Well, you can go back in history, but you lose all the other steps. You have to do those steps again. And you also lose the ability to control where exactly that adjustment is taking place. For example, for this image, I want a lot more brightness on the leaves from the foreground trees, but I can't have that with these destructive adjustments. So the way to correct this mistake is to use adjustment layers, and you create them from here. And for example, I create the brightness and contrast. I increase the brightness, and I take a look at these leaves because I want a lot more brightness in that area, and increase the contrast. And now I can invert the mask, and I can bring back the effect of this layer only where I want this layer to be visible, the adjustment. Now, as you can see, it looks bad because I'm doing the adjustment only here, but you can reincorporate this in the mask by using different opacities in the brush, and you can make, for example, this brightness work. Now you'll have to excuse the noise of the mouse button because I have to do a lot of clicks in order for me to make the image work. But the point is that now it doesn't matter how many adjustments I'm having on top of this layer. If I want to correct it at some point, I can go back, work on the brightness again, work on the contrast again, adjust the mask again. So I have a lot more control. Again, let's create a hue and saturation, and we increase the saturation, and we say, okay, I want the saturation to be placed only on these leaves. Again, you can invert the mask, and you can come back with a brush, and you paint something like this, and now you have a lot more control on your image. Now let's move on to mistake number 2. At some point in the history of Camera Raw and Lightroom, the guys from Adobe decided that they're going to include a slider called Dehaze. And when I saw this slider, I was very excited, and I'm pretty sure a lot of photographers were excited because you can remove the haze, or you can bring back some details when the image has lower contrast. And in my mind, this slider worked in a different way than it does, because you can use the haze, but only on a limited but only with 100% care, because the haze can basically destroy the feeling of the image, and it can also destroy the image technically. Let me show you this this photo. For example, this was the mood of that day. That complete loss of contrast, and the fog having the entire landscape surrounded, and the light that comes from the background that lights up the fog. Now, if I go with the dehaze and I start to increase it, up to a certain point, it can work in my favor, but from certain values, it starts to damage the image. The image loses, first of all, it loses the feel, the true feel of that morning, and at a certain point, it's just ruined. And I saw it numerous times, in numerous occasions. I saw people using the dehaze too much. I want to preserve the feeling that this image has, the feeling that it had from that morning. And for example, the thing that I would do in this case would be to use the clarity a little bit, the contrast a little bit, and maybe drop down the blacks just a tiny bit. Now for the lower part, I will decrease the highlights and the whites. And this was it, the original image and the final image. The idea is to preserve the feel of the image, and you're losing that when you go overboard with the dehaze. The third mistake I want to talk about is oversaturating a photo. This happens a lot with photos that are done during sunrises, sunsets, in autumn, in places where you feel that you could benefit from all those colors. And the problem is that people are using the saturation slider, they go overboard with it, something like this, for example, and the image starts to look cartoony. It's having colors that are not from this world. And there are two ways to correct this very fast. First of all, don't use saturation, use vibrance, because vibrance was built with the intent to protect the oversaturation of colors, especially in the tones that are related to skin, yellow, orange, red. And whenever we're photographing sunrises, sunsets, and autumn landscapes, we have a lot of those colors. So let me just show you, for example, if you go with saturation overboard a little bit, let's say a value of 60, okay, the image looks like this. But if we reset this and we go with a value of 60 in vibrance, the image looks like this. So it's not losing the touch with reality. Now, what I like to do is another thing, is use vibrance together with another thing. And I will go to color mixer and go into the saturation, the HSL panel, go to saturation, and pull all these sliders to 0, having an image of black and white. And now I can start pulling these sliders. I don't look at the values. I look only at the image and see how much color that particular slider introduces in the image. For example, magentas, none, purples, none, blues, none, aquas, a little bit of aqua, greens, somewhere around here, yellow. Now we're starting to see some color appearing in the trees. Orange, somewhere around here, I think, and reds, somewhere around here. Now, once I've established a balance between colors, now I can go and increase the vibrance. And another tip would be, before increasing the vibrance, adjust the contrast, because the minute you adjust the contrast of the image, you will have a different feel of the colors. Okay, so let's take a look at the original image and the edited image. And this is, again, a very simple way to correct a mistake that could make your photos look funny or cartoony. Now, before ending this video, I have a fourth tip. So the fourth mistake that I want to talk about is editing your photos with no intent. There are a lot of people that do this mistake. They believe that the basic adjustments, like color adjustment, temperature adjustment, highlights, contrast, and shadows, all this is editing. So these, in my personal opinion, these are basic editing steps that you have to do with every image. But after that comes the true editing part, and that editing part refers to your vision on the photo that you have in front of you. You have to have a vision, you have to think about it in a different way. It's basically your own style. When you're developing your own style, you start to have a certain vision on those images. It's something that I talk about in my ebook about landscape photography, but it's something that you will develop over time. It's not something that will appear just like that, but in time you'll start to have your own vision and understand what you can do in terms of editing on the image, and you'll start doing it. Until next time, keep on photographing, because it's the only way that you can get better. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.